A man would be sentenced to death for one murder, and then many years later, he would be convicted of another murder, all thanks to some Legos. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of John Sansing. Viewer discretion is advised. Elizabeth Gertrude Calabrese, who would go by Trudy to everyone in her life, she was born on April 1st, 1956. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of information on her. I do know that she was a technical sergeant in the U.S. Air Force for some time, and then she would go on to become a mother of 2 children. And at the time of this case, she is 41 years old, and she's living with her family in Phoenix, Arizona. Trudy was a very proud member of the Living Springs Assembly Church of God. Trudy would also volunteer her time with the church literally all the time, and she would help deliver food to those who were in need of food. On February 24th, 1998, the church that Trudy volunteered with would get a phone call from a man named John Sansing. He was requesting a box of food because his family, he claimed, was, less fortunate. So Trudy was the volunteer to be assigned to deliver food to Sansing and his family. She took the box of food. She drove to his home. She brought with her 2 boxes of food. She would place it down on the table and say, God bless. And then she would turn around and she was about to leave the house. But John Sansing had other ideas in mind. Before she could leave, he grabbed her and yanked her back into the house and slammed and locked the door. He threw her to the ground, where he would then tie her arms behind her back and tied her at the feet as well. He then took a wooden club of some kind and he struck it over her head so hard that the club itself broke in half. John Sansing is married to a woman named Kara. They have 4 children together. Kara and the 4 children are literally in the house while this is going on. Kara does nothing. The 4 children, they're just in the other room with the door closed. John grabs Trudy, drags her into his bedroom, where he proceeds to sexually assault her. She is slipping in and out of consciousness because he hit her over the head with that club. When he is done sexually assaulting her, he runs to grab a kitchen knife and then he jabs it into her abdomen 3 different times. And she bleeds out slowly and painfully, and he watches her die. According to Kara Sansing, who was there the entire time, Trudy fought like hell. She slipped in and out of consciousness, but when she was awake, she was fighting as much as she could to try to get away. Kara was doing nothing to help her. At one point, Trudy saw the kids, and according to Kara, Trudy screamed at the kids to please call 911. But John forced them back into their bedroom to keep watching TV and turn up the volume. The kids would later tell police that they heard Trudy say and scream, "God, please help me. If this is the way you want me to come home, then I will come home." Kara would also testify later that Trudy was awake for the majority of the sexual assault and she was begging for help, and Kara did nothing. After she was killed, John fled the house and ran to his sister's home, where he told her that he was high on crack. He didn't really know what he was doing. Police would be called to the Sansing home. Basically, once, Trudy didn't report back to the church and she never came home, she went missing, basically, but they were able to quickly track where she had gone last. And police were able to arrest both John and Kara Sansing. Kara would openly admit that she was present during the sexual assault and she was present during the physical murder. As a matter of fact, she literally helped him tie her up. She would end up pleading guilty to first-degree murder, and she got 25 years to life for her involvement. The 4 kids, they range from age 9 to 12. And now they are probably traumatized for the rest of their lives for having to see and hear that. John Sansing was arrested and he was charged with capital murder because this clearly was a premeditated attack. He had tried to call another church shortly before Trudy's church to try to get someone to his apartment. His intent the entire time was to have a female come to his house under this guise of needing food to basically sexually assault and kill them. Admittedly, he was, I believe they confirmed he was on drugs at the time, so he was high on something. I believe they did say it was crack cocaine. Kara and John Sansing had allegedly met, I guess, 15 years prior to this. Kara was in and out of, I think, adoption agencies, and then when she met John, the two of them just began this life of drugs, and committing like petty crimes. Allegedly, a few months before the murder, John and Kara had stopped doing drugs. They stopped drinking for the better of their children, and that's when they started going to church and when they said they found God. But literally like a couple of months into that, they slipped back into their drug lifestyle, stopped going to church, and then they did this. John Sansing would go on trial. He did not plead guilty. He wanted to go to trial. This was a capital murder trial, which means he could be sentenced to death if found guilty. And after the trial, John Sansing was found guilty of capital murder and he was sentenced to death. John Sansing is still currently awaiting his execution, but his story isn't done yet. On February 1st, 1991, in the state of Utah, specifically in Salt Lake City, a 78-year-old woman named Lucille Johnson was last seen sweeping the porch of her house. She went back into her home, and then no one can claim they ever saw her again. Her family tried getting a hold of her, but she never answered her phone. So eventually a family member went to her home, knocked on the door, nobody answered. They looked in the windows, couldn't see anything. So they then just opened the door and went inside. One of Shirley's daughters went into her bedroom and saw lying on her bed with a pillow over her face. She had been severely beaten, and sadly she was deceased. The coroner would determine that she had a fractured skull. She had 24 broken ribs and even more extreme trauma, blunt force trauma to her head. And then they determined that she was also strangled. And the strangulation is what her actual cause of death was. So she was alive for most of the beating and she essentially was tortured. When detectives were processing the crime scene, they found Legos kind of on the floor of the house and also like a trail of Legos going outside the house. The family confirmed that those were not her grandkids' Legos, that Lucille was a very clean person and the grandkids' toys were always picked up and taken home with them. They also processed underneath her fingernails and they did find DNA at the time, but in 1991 the technology wasn't quite there. So they really couldn't do much with it. They couldn't match it to anyone, at least. Lucille's case went cold for decades, until 2013. In 2013, the Salt Lake City Police Department had a cold case team that looked at the fingernail scrapings again, and they ran it through the system. This time, there was a match to a man who was waiting his death sentence in Phoenix, Arizona. His name was John Sansing. But police couldn't establish any kind of connection between John and Lucille. The fingernail scrapings were pretty damning evidence. But what they couldn't determine was, how he gained entry, because there was no forced entry in this situation. And they took another look at the Legos. The Legos were proved to be very damning. Thankfully, the police back then kept them and stored them properly. This cold case team would look at the Legos now for fingerprints. Lo and behold, many of the Legos had fingerprints on them. They weren't John's fingerprints. So police would determine that in order to gain entry to this house, John must have brought a child with him in order to maybe convince Lucille to let him in because, my child's in need and needs help or something, right? So he used his kid. The fingerprints on the Legos, because they would then take fingerprints from all of John's children who are now grown up. The fingerprints on the Legos were a confirmed match to one of John Sansing's children. That places the Legos that belonged to John Sansing's child in the house of Lucille. That, plus the fingernail scrapings underneath her nails, confirmed that John Sansing was in the house. He used his own child to gain entry to that house to sexually assault and then brutally murder a 78-year-old defenseless woman. He was an extreme drug addict back in 1991, so the likelihood is he was once again on drugs, but they didn't have any way of confirming that, nor would it truly matter. On August 28th, 2014, this is about 23 years after the murder of Lucille Johnson, John Sansing was found guilty of her murder. I believe he was convicted and given a life without parole sentence. I mean, he won't be able to serve for very long because he will be executed at some point. I don't know when his execution date is actually going to be. But I hope he rots in hell. What a sick, disgusting person, right? First of all, to bring your child as a tool to gain entry into the home of an elderly woman for the purpose of sexually assaulting and killing her. Your child. You use your child literally as a weapon. And then, in front of your 4 children's ears and eyes, you sexually assault, kidnap, and murder another woman. Don't do drugs, kids, because this is the kind of crap that could happen when you are this much into it. But to be honest with you, I think even if he wasn't on drugs, he is probably still very much capable of this, because it was him who did it. It was him, not the drugs. But I hope he's uncomfortable as hell on death row, and I hope he enjoys his new permanent residence down below. But that is it for this case, true crimerers. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this video, hello, I'm Mike. I tell 4 true crime stories a week here on YouTube. I also tell one on Instagram, one on Facebook, and then a few throughout the week over on TikTok. So please feel free to subscribe here, give this video a like, and then follow my other platforms if you so choose. They are all in the link tree in the description below. Next, if you have a case you would like me to cover, just email me. That email address is below. Just email me the name of the person, where it happened, when it happened, and then I can eventually add it to my list. I pick my cases that I cover at random, so it will happen eventually. I just cannot tell you when. I do that to be fair. If you would like to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and a wine glass and stuff. We do ship internationally as well. So that's also in the link tree below. And lastly, if you want to join my Discord server, I do have one. It's a very quiet, very chill server. It's not a crazy busy one, the way I like it. The link is in the link tree as well, and then please be over the age of 18 or else you will be kicked out of it, unfortunately. Sorry, not sorry. But that is it for this video, true crime-a-rooney dooney ding dongs. Let me finish this video by telling you a dad joke from the game Live, Laugh, Lose. Oh, I gotta do an impression too, I forgot. Read the joke and add multiple swear words. You got it. Hey, I would fucking avoid the fucking sushi if you were, you son of a bitch. You wanna fucking know why, you piece of shit? It's a little fishy, fucker. It's a little fishy. That was very, very mouthy. But it told me to, so don't yell at me. Listen, it's what it said. Don't get an attitude with me for cursing, all right? Puta. Anyway, bye-sies. I'll see yous all later. This is so awkward.